Joining me now is author Jamie Michaels from Winnipeg, and from Toronto, from Historica Canada, Ellie Yarhe. Welcome to the CJN Daily.
Great to be here.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So we're about to mark the 88th anniversary of the Christie Pitts riots. Briefly, why is this such a seminal story? Start with you, Jamie.
I think the Christie Pitts riots kind of really captured a time in Canada's history where it was a different Canada than we can picture it today. It was a xenophobic Canada. It was a Canada of Anglo supremacy. And the Christie Pitts riots, in my mind, marks a point where the Jewish community said no. They stood their ground in a public space. They fought for a Canada that could be brighter than it was, that could be more multicultural than it was. And in the aftermath of the riot, we see Mayor Stewart introduce maybe one of Canada's first pieces of anti-hate speech legislation, a policy that banned the flying of the swastika in Toronto. And kind of from that seed, we really see a small push towards the multicultural Canada that we have today.
And why did Historica Canada feel after all these years that it was time to revisit this important historical event?
This was part of a larger multiculturalism education campaign that we've been launching this year. It includes a 3-part mini documentary series, of which this video is a part, but it also includes a 5-part podcast series and an education guide to follow this fall that will sort of encapsulate everything together and bring this material to our primary audience, which is students and their teachers. When we were considering this story, we had known for some time that we wanted to cover it, and when this project came up, we knew that it would be a shoo-in. I had purchased the graphic novel for myself and a second copy for my father-in-law. And when I showed up to give him the book, he also had a book ready for me. So we swapped the same book back and forth. So we were, very excited to cover this at Historica Canada. And especially as Jamie was pointing out, we're looking for stories that showed some agency on the part of the communities in question. Some of the other mini documentaries in this series include also the story of the Komagata Maru in 1914, and also the construction of the Al Rashid Mosque in Edmonton. So we like to identify these stories in which the those who were oppressed at the time are demonstrating some level of protections for their community in quite vocal and impactful ways.
Now, a couple of years ago when your book came out, Jamie, you said, quote, "We certainly don't live in the same hateful conditions of 1933, but I believe there are lessons to be gleaned from the riots that are relevant today as much as when they occurred." Fast forward to 2021, the summer of 2021, when rising anti-Semitism has spiked because of the May hostilities between Israel and Hamas. Where does your book fit in even today, where this is, if not the worst, then close to the worst anti-Semitism the world has seen since Second World War?
I think we're really learning the lessons in my graphic novel, the correlation between culture and violence. And in 1933, it may have been the connection between newspapers and between public animosity. In contemporary Canada, we're really seeing a lot of this inflammation being driven digitally on social media, online, on forums. So I think the idea of radicalization, the idea of anti-Semitism is tied to 2 factors. It's tied to the media that people consume, but it's also tied to economic conditions. And it's no surprise that the Christie Pitts riots was taking place at the height of the Great Depression. And in the same way now, we're seeing a lot of economic stratification. So I think the playbook is still very similar. And what I'm hoping people can glean is kind of lessons of tolerance from the graphic novel, while at the same time acknowledging that there are parallels, but no 2 moments in history are exactly analogous.
I want to pick up on something you just mentioned. Earlier when you were doing your book launches, you mentioned that the swastika is the symbol and called it Tinder. We see swastikas being put on cars, on schools, on Jewish cemeteries, on you name it, around Canada and of course around the world this year. you know, you said the conditions are economic, what did you say, stratification, but we've also had a COVID problem, which has made people even more unsettled, and looking for answers and looking to blame someone. So, you know, do you see that, you know, we're in a serious situation like they were back 88 years ago today?
Again, I really want to stress that these moments in history are unique. This idea that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So I don't want to say that we're living in 1933. I don't think that that's an appropriate direct comparison. I think that we really have to combat this anti-Semitism ferociously with the knowledge that the conditions are different, the behavior is different. We still have to treat it with an incredible amount of gravitas. Projects like this Historic Canada documentary, the Christy Pitts graphic novel, we're working towards educating younger Canadians about the risks of this inflammatory rhetoric. Yes, absolutely. These swastikas are gravely concerning. But I think that now, unlike then, we're seeing condemnation from public figures. We're seeing the Prime Minister having this national summit, this forum on anti-Semitism. So there are things about the time that we're living in now that give me hope.
I want to ask you about the reaction to your, this is for the Historic Canada moment that came out. I want to ask you, what was the reaction in June when this little video was released?
Generally very positive. We were really proud to see that there was great pickup. A lot of influential folks were sharing the story in their networks, which actually managed to make this one of the most successful non-Heritage Minute organic launches that we've had for a video project. So in those terms, we saw a lot of people just anecdotally describing how important it is to see this story covered, certainly at a time such as now, and that also that they see themselves reflected in depictions of Canadian history, good, bad, or in this case, terrible.
So I noticed when I was preparing for today's interview, the comments are turned off. When I saw the video released in June, there was some chatter online about hateful comments being posted on the YouTube site where it was released. Can you walk me through what happened with Historic Canada decision to deal with these comments, and were there ever comments allowed, and then what happened?
We are, of course, in charge of moderating the comments on the YouTube channel and other platforms as best we can. We were initially, able to mitigate a lot of the negative and truly unsettling comments that were being posted to the YouTube video, and it did reach a point where, rather than keeping up with the comments that were landing on the page that were truly terrible, we decided to end commenting on the video.
So how does that impact you personally on such an important project that you shepherded through when you see this garbage and toxic comments as well?
That is, it hits you, right? Cuts you right to the quick, so to speak. My father always has an expression that you're only as Jewish as somebody else wants you to be. Mm. And it's in instances like that I think it really drives home. And it's not something that you necessarily encounter in your day-to-day, but it's there from time to time.
It's just it's a shame because that's not how you were expecting this to go, right? But you launched it right after the Hamas-Israel hostilities. So you weren't to know, I suppose, how this was going to work out.
I am sort of familiar with when Jamie launched the book that he said that the timing of its arrival was, I can't remember the quote exactly, but he said that it was depressingly topical, and that was in 2019. And here we are again in 2021.
So how are you both using your material or planning to use your material? You talked about education for young people. That's your your target, you know, what is it being used for in schools? Can you give some examples of your talks and your lectures and how it's being adopted, if at all, in schools, both the little video as well as your book?
Sure. So the graphic novel, we've had the opportunity just before COVID really took it away from us of presenting this work in some schools. And, you know, as a Jewish book with Jewish themes, you can't present it without a modicum of shtick. So the shtick we had, and in the graphic novel, we covered this incredible boxing match between Hitler's favorite boxer, you know, Max Schmeling, fighting this Jewish #1 contender, Max Baer, at a sold-out Yankee Stadium. So this is an electric moment in sports. It kind of captures the feeling of the age, the rise of Nazism, the pains of the Depression. And it's really this electric moment being radio broadcast around the world. So to kind of facilitate that and to try to draw these young people into this world, we have 2 boxers planted in the crowds. And as we give the reading, the boxers come out and enact this historic match, which I feel really brings people into that moment. There's yelling, there's foot stomping, and we try to make the history at a higher speed limit than it's usually taught. So that's been great. We've gotten great reception from the classrooms we've been in, and we're hoping to reinvigorate that process after everyone is fully vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. So are you able to be doing it were you able to do it online at all over the last 16 months?
I don't think it carries the same gravitas. I think there's a certain level of Zoom fatigue. So we're planning to reinstigate the process in real time.
Mm-hmm. And what about this being used in schools for Historica Canada? How are you going to use it this fall?
We have a network of over 70,000 educators in our who we reach out to regularly. And so this fall, the education guide that I had referenced earlier will land, and it will have specific lesson plans drafted for teachers to use to teach this this mini documentary in their classrooms. And one of the great things about this is, of course, that it's a graphic interpretation of something that doesn't necessarily have all of the visual elements that the story would have to be necessarily told in a bright and impactful way.
Right. Let's talk specifically about the art and the genre of graphic novels, if we can. I couldn't find it online in any online version or ebook version, and that's kind of where young people gravitate. Can you speak to the decision? And I might be wrong, of course, but was there a decision just to have it as a physical novel and not anything that they can share and watch on their phones?
Yeah, so I think that for the graphic novel, it really lends itself to being a physical medium. It doesn't have the same impact if you're on a tablet as, let's say, a conventional book of prose. So our decision was kind of to respect the medium, to respect the hard copy. We did a limited digital release for people that were unable to have a hard copy shipped to them or wanted an advanced educator's copy. So there is a digital version, but we deliberately haven't been selling them in our online shop because our preference is always really push the hard copy experience.
A lot of my students actually watch, graphic novels and cartoons on YouTube and web series and things like that. That's what they on YouTube. So, is there any planning to do anything like that at all in the future? Make it an animated?
The video and the comic medium, I feel, are quite different. And for the comic medium, again, and I might be a purist and maybe I'm an artist first and a businessman second. That very well may be the case. But I do respect the hard copy medium for the graphic novel form. Christie Pitts has been optioned as an animated film. So we're working with a Toronto studio right now. We've just finished a first 7-minute proof of concept. So the wheels are turning on that project. So as an animated film, I can certainly live with it. I think I'll be delighted to see it take that form and reach young people that way. But for the graphic novel, I think there's a real advantage to having it in your hands. And also we incorporate so much archival material from the day into the graphic novel. We incorporate, primary source newspaper clippings. And I want students to be able to stop and read them and not be rushed through that process. So again, I think the graphic novel gives you something, the documentary gives you something, and the animated film will give you something.
Can we talk specifically about some of the, I don't know, for lack of a better word, Easter eggs or hidden hints or throwbacks to certain historical events or people in your book? So, for example, the boxer Sami, I know about Sami Lufspring. Was that the inspiration for that name?
I think the inspiration, my grandfather is also a Sami. So there's some family lore woven into that text. But I think, I also read the Lufspring biography, and I think that Jewish boxing was such a dominant part of Jewish culture in Toronto in the 30s. And I think people find that surprising today. And if you look at different waves of immigrant culture coming to North America, boxing has always been a bit of a harbor for them. So I kind of wanted to capture that feeling of the time. And I think the fact that it's had that tradition gives it a certain universality.
What about one of the other things that people should be looking for when they're looking through the novels that's maybe more recent history of, let's say in the States, for example, of where can they find these little Easter eggs?
Sure. So I think you're kind of giving a nod to when they had these horrific Charlottesville tiki torch white supremacist marches. I was so enraged by this as a creator, and I went back to the graphic novel and I wanted to edit some sections to include illustrations of these white supremacists in the graphic novel drawn as members of the Swastika Club. Because I feel that if you're openly going to embrace Nazi values, you should be publicly identified as such. So this is kind of a subtle nod to immortalizing these groups of truly despicable people in black and white, and also kind of nodding at the correlation between the emotions that bring these people into these movements across history.
What about this this urban legend that the lyrics to Bob Cajun are reference to it? I have some of the lyrics here. Did you ever, first of all, I'll read them out. And their voices rang with that Aryan twang. I got to your house this morning, just a little after 9. And anyway, it talks about people riding on horseback, keeping order restored to the men they couldn't hang. Is this really a thing? Did you research that? Did you ask them?
Sure.
I'm the Tragically Hip, I should say, just for our listeners.
I suppose that art and interpretation are always in the eye of the beholder. I certainly see some references in that track in our encyclopedia article for the Canadian Encyclopedia. We do reference that correlation, but I think everyone has to listen to the song and make up their own mind. But
you never talked to them about it?
Oh, I have yet to have the opportunity to have coffee with the Tragically Hip, but it's certainly, it'd be on the list.
And about some things, let's do 5 things that people probably don't know about the Christie Pitts riots. So the first thing is swastika clubs and the beaches of Toronto. What is that? People should know what that was. Because today, that's the sort of shishi place to buy a house. Everybody goes to the beaches. But if you peel back, 80 years, 85 years, the swastika clubs are something we should tell them.
Sure. So I would frame swastika clubs as associations of young men in Toronto's beaches with the manifesto of, quote, keeping Toronto's beaches clean, end quote, or, quote, keeping Toronto's beaches free of undesirables, end quote. So I think that you're looking at a group of xenophobic young men, and that kind of shows the baked in Anglo anti-Semitism of the day. And they're using a symbol that they know has cachet and symbolism for Toronto's Jewish community. And it's always hard to view these things in retrospective. Today, the swastika means a very specific thing. In 1933, I think this is maybe in addition to these 5 things you should know, Toronto's Jewry was amongst the best educated in the world of the atrocities being committed in Nazi Germany. The Toronto Daily Star was one of the hardest hitting newspapers of that time in history. We're looking at a Toronto Daily Star where Ernest Hemingway was a reporter. We're looking at Pierre Van Passen being a special correspondent overseas, being captured by the Nazis and escaping, and bringing some of the most visceral, disturbing journalism to Toronto. So there couldn't be a better informed community. I believe it was the first North American newspaper to be banned by Nazi Germany. So this information is coming to the Jewish community. So when they see the symbol, they know what it stands for. And the Swastika Club was deliberately anti-Semitic and inflammatory as such. So these organizations in which Canada has a long history of, which is covered in the documentary, were, in my imagination, perhaps best represented by these swastika clubs on the beaches.
Okay, and how many people, this is another thing, how many people were ever charged and convicted of the of assaults during the Christie Pitts riots? That's another thing people don't know.
Yeah, I think 2 charges were laid during the course of the riot, and both were, I think, maybe a couple nights in jail were spent, but really these are token charges laid by the police who are undergoing a major scandal for have been warned about this riot and not allocating the correct amount of enforcement. And they said, you know, the Jews are in the streets and we'll let society sort it out. And I think the pushback from the Jews was unforeseen by the police department and hence the scale of the riot. And what I'll ask you from Historica Canada's perspective, what was the one thing you didn't know that you learned, Eli, about the Christie Pitts riots?
I would say definitely its connection to some of the first anti-hate legislation in Canada. That was something that was novel to me, and I'm sure my colleagues as well. We definitely tried to expand the scope for this mini documentary to contain more of a national historical approach. And so to bring that initial piece of legislation as it would expand out later as Canada became a bit, a much more welcoming place, that was definitely news to us.
You, I forgot to ask you, how are you, if at all, going to be marking the anniversary?
We will be, doing a secondary launch for the video itself, which we're very much looking forward to. Looking to see some additional pickup there, as we know that it had a great initial launch, and then of course there's likely to be another tertiary push in the fall when we sort of bring the entire multiculturalism education campaign together. So that's that.
I'm working on a small article about lessons from Christie Pitts that are applicable to the time we live in now. God willing, it will be finished by the anniversary. And I'll be putting that out and looking forward to feedback.
And telling people how they can get the second edition or second run of your book, because it's sold out, right?
Absolutely. Every copy flew off the shelves at the classic Historica Canada bump. So we're looking forward to getting the second run underway and hopefully in the fall going back into schools and helping to share this history. Okay. It was great to have both of you here on the CJN Daily. Thanks so much. Terrific to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.